Now recording.
Okay, today we're going to continue our discussion of high Renaissance masters in Italy, and we're going to move our focus now from Rome, which had that triumvirate of Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael, all living and working in Rome at the same time. Now we're going to switch our focus to the northern Italian city of Venice. And we're going to look mostly at Titian, whose name is Tiziano, but also Giorgioni. And a lot of times it's hard to tell which one is which because they collaborated in the early part of their years. Okay, so Venice is a very different looking than Florence or Rome or any of the other Italian cities because it has this wonderful kind of Oriental flavor in the sense of you feel like you're closer to the Mideast. You feel you're closer to Turkey. To there are arabesques in the architecture, and of course the canals and the lagoon are the outstanding thing that makes Venice truly unique. And if you've never been there, it's go there as soon as the plague lifts because it is a magical place. There are no cars. You have to leave your car before you enter the city. So the city is all this incredible network, like spaghetti almost, of little tiny kind of like alleyways, only they're not alleyways because everything is a walkway. And it is so confusing. I mean, it is so easy to get turned around that it's only the native people really know their way around Venice. And they designed it that way, so that if they were attacked, any invaders would be confounded by the crazy streets. And it has a charm and a romance and a mystery all of its own. Venice. Okay. And of course, the great artist of Venice, and we had looked at him in an earlier series on the early Renaissance that we did last fall, Giovanni Bellini, or Giambellino as his nickname is. Everything in Venice is pronounced a little differently. They use a lot of Z's. So like Santo Paolo because Zanipolo, and even if you don't speak the language, you hear the musical kind of tonality of that very distinct Venetian thing. It's a very beautiful Oriental and kind of exotic city in some ways. One of the great crafts, and we don't have time to talk about that right here, but is Venetian Glassworks. They had the most amazing glass blowers beginning in the Renaissance and continuing up to the present time. And they do just incredible work. And the famous contemporary glassblower Dale Chihuly spent time studying with people in Venice. Well, Bellini was the great master, and Bellini was one of the first Italian artists to master oil paint, which was invented in Flanders, which was a Netherlandish thing, but Bellini was one of the first to use it. And he was a master of color. And for example, in the red robe of that prophet on the right of his composition, the colors absolutely sing. And that's what Venice is noted for. Now, to kind of introduce you to Venice, I'm going to kind of show you a comparison so you can kind of begin to see the different orientation between the artists who are centered in Florence and Rome, in central Italy, and the northern Italian Venetians. This is Raphael's Deposition of Christ, and we looked at this the last time. It's a fairly early work, but a mature work. And I wanted to compare that to a work done about 8-10 years later by Titian. And it's the very same subject matter, and that's why I brought them together here. And Vasari, the Renaissance historian we've been referring to for the last several lectures, says there's a real difference between the Florentine and Roman, emphasis on disegno. And disegno is a word in Italian that doesn't have an exact equivalent in English. It both means drawing and design. They have just one word for drawing and design. It's disegno. And this is what the Florentine were masters of drawing, of line, of design, of complicated design. On the other hand, the Venetians were known for colore, or color. And I just want to look at these two pieces a little more carefully. Here in the Raphael, you can see the weight of the figures. You can see the sort of three-dimensional placing of the figures as they recede into the background, and the complicated sort of relationships between the figures, this kind of V shape, this kind of triangular shape that's here, these overarching design elements that give it its complexity and its linear quality. Look at how different this looks. And it's 8-10 years later, but it's very, very different, because he's not so concerned with perspective or the exact placement in space of each of these figures, but rather he sort of evokes the figures from the color that they embody, or the color from the setting sun that they someone needs to mute the poodle for such a solemn painting, especially. And you can see that he really works with color, that the forms all emerge not from drawing or design. It's not that there isn't design. There's, for example, a triangle that goes from here, kind of goes up here, has its apex in the face of St. John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, the only one who the Gospels tell us didn't abandon him when he was crucified. And then Nicodemus here, and Joseph of Arimathea, who gave his own tomb for Jesus's body to be put in. Over on the side is Mary, his mother, and Mary Magdalene, his female, leading female disciple. And they very solemnly place him in the tomb. It's all lighted by this twilight, and especially this orange, the way it sort of emerges from the background. It has an electric sort of resonance, a lucid, almost as if light is coming from behind the canvas. And of course, it is the setting sun, but it illuminates even the figures that way. So it's like Titian works with color. Vasari says he doesn't even draw sometimes, he just starts applying color. So he really thinks in terms of color and light. And this becomes his major medium of telling the story. And I think he tells it in a very dramatic and very sad and solemn way. That's more moving to me than the more sort of beautifully designed and intricately drawn and linear quality of the Raphael. The clarity of the light in the Raphael, and the misty sort of, the way these figures sort of emerge from the twilight shadows as the sun is sinking, And of course, it's a metaphor for the sinking of life, for the death, not only of Jesus, but of the whole movement, because they weren't ready to have their rabbi die so suddenly and unexpectedly at Passover. That's why there wasn't even planning for where he would be entombed. Okay, so you get the basic idea. So with this kind of thing, let's go back a little bit in time and look at Giorgioni. And Giorgioni is another one of those nicknames that Italians all have, for each other. And it means Big George. And I guess he was a very, very large man, and very handsome man, they said, very strong, very kind of imposing presence. And they say also that he had a lovely voice, a lovely baritone voice, and that he would play the lute and sing. And Giorgioni is just a few years older than Titian. He studied like Titian did, in the studio of Bellini, of Gian Bellino. And so from there, he learned oil paint. But Giorgioni creates these very strange, sort of mysterious, poetic compositions, like this one called The Tempest. It's a small painting made for a private patron, and there's been a lot of debate over the centuries of exactly what's being shown here. Vasari describes it as a gypsy woman nursing her baby, and a soldier, a disheveled sort of soldier, standing to the side with the broken off pillars and the approaching storm that casts a weird kind of light to everything. That's in a weird, haunting light that where it turns sort of green or something just before the storm approaches. And again, it's this twilight, and it's a very small, very intimate kind of picture. There, the woman, and then partly it has to do with the kind of darkness of the painting, that perhaps they felt she was a gypsy woman, because there are gypsies in Italy, and they do nurse their baby out as they're begging for coins on the street and so forth. And so it wouldn't have been, but I mean, her nakedness is kind of very inexplicable. That she would be nursing her child, that's kind of understandable, but you know, exactly what does this represent, and what does the soldier represent, and especially his disheveled quality. He's kind of a haniak, if I can use the Yiddish term, a disheveled soldier. His hair is kind of disorderly. He has two different colored hose on, one yellow, one red. His uniform is sort of, you know, it's not tidy looking. And behind him are these two pillars that are broken off. And we don't know what that means. So different sorts of interpretations have been everything from that's Adam and Eve and their first child after the fall of mankind, to it being a very personal thing about the family for which it was commissioned. But one of the things is when we, after, you know, decades and centuries of speculating what these figures mean, when we x-rayed it in the 20th century, we found out that there actually was originally another female nude in the foreground, sort of bathing in the river, and then he covered it up later with his soldier. So whatever the allegory was, the soldier wasn't really central to the story, apparently, because he started painting and got quite advanced, as you can see in the execution. That the figure isn't finished, but I mean, you can see they got quite a ways before he decided to scrape it off and go back and put this soldier in. So, but I think what may be happening here, and it's called poesis, poeticness, or poetic quality, that he wants to create a reverie, a sense of poetry, not vague, not necessarily having specific symbolism, but rather sort of conjuring up a mood or a feeling that has a kind of poetry to it. And I think if you look at it this way, and you let it retain the mystery of what is actually happening, and kind of just accept that and look at it as a kind of strange but very portentous, very mysterious, very evocative, very kind of sexual too, in some ways. The way the nursing woman looks at us, it has well, it could be interpreted a lot of different ways. And I think that's because he purposely leaves it ambiguous. And we don't know what the story is, but yet we want to find out what the story is, because the picture kind of suggests a narrative, but then doesn't give us a clear story around which to weave this narrative, other than kind of a poetic reverie, a bringing together of different elements that don't necessarily make any logical sense, but are there just for their evocative qualities. And, you know, it's a very evocative painting. Here's the disheveled soldier and the lightning striking the background, which I think illuminates the buildings there, which are in Venice in a very kind of strange way, the way lightning does. This also, and it begins to be unclear where Titian ends, and I mean, where Giorgioni ends and where Titian begins, because this is an example, this Venus that Giorgioni began and then Titian finished. And it is really hard to tell what parts are by whom, because they had worked together so closely for so long. This is an incredibly sensuous Venus, and she's in a very lush, hazy kind of landscape. And this is another thing that we'll notice is when we looked at Roman art and Florentine art, landscape was not very developed in the background, with the exception of Leonardo da Vinci, who puts in those misty, wonderful backgrounds. And Giorgioni is probably familiar with this and bathes his background likewise in this light. The colors are absolutely gorgeous because it's not painted on a panel. You know, the Romans, the Florentines, the Romans liked panels, wood panels, or as fresco, because it has a dry kind of linear quality. But oil paint on a canvas, and the way canvas has give, you know, as you stretch a canvas, it has a drum-like quality as you're applying the paint. And it also has a texture that, you know, wood doesn't. And so he really exploits this texture beautifully by just taking this brush, and I wish I could demonstrate it for you because I can see how he did it, although I can't do it as well as him. But he just takes a little bit and just sort of scumbles it on with a dry brush, just sort of scrubbing it across the surface very, very lightly. So these forms just sort of emerge, and they don't have any hard edges at all. They all sort of blend into this wonderful misty atmosphere. In this particular painting, and it doesn't come across in the reproduction, you have to take my word for it, but the red velvet garment that she's lying on, I guess maybe these are her clothes that she's taken off, and then below her this wonderful satin garment, these complement the flesh tones of the nude in an incredibly, I don't know, any way to, delicious way, like gourmet colors, you know, glowing from underneath. Now, it's said that both Bellini and all the Venetians use this Venetian red, which is this orange, a brick orange red, and that they covered the whole canvas in that, and then worked with that. So there's always this red, this rose color that seems to be underneath everything. The same way that Leonardo and Raphael would have ochre, kind of a yellow background from which the figures emerged. Here we have this red, and so this red kind of glows through all the very different layers of glaze and scumbling, and it's just like, you know, he's breathed the paint onto this canvas. It's breathtaking. It's interesting that the little hamlet in the background looks more like a northern city, could be in Germany or in the Netherlands, with those thatched roofs and those pitched roofs like that. In Italy, it isn't. So it's interesting that he sets this, the scene of the sleeping Venus, kind of in a northern area. Now, it is true that there was some relationship between, it is Dürer, Albrecht Dürer, the great Renaissance German artist, came to visit Venice in 1505 and stayed for like a couple of years. And and Dürer writes about it, he's like I am. He loves Italian culture. He loves everything about it. He loves the Italian men. He says they're so sweet and so personable, and the food and the Gemütlichkeit is incredible. And he made a real impression on the Venetians when he came, and he did some painting while he was there. So so there is this dialogue going on, and Giorgioni and Titian, they're very aware also of what's going on in Florence, of what's going on in Rome. So there's a dialogue that's going on, discourse over the centuries. I want to mention too, I studied with Rona Goffin, who is now deceased, but she was one of the really great art historians dealing with the Venetian Renaissance. And she had a strange theory, and it came out, I guess, in the 90s. But she found these family planning writings from the time that suggested that women masturbating themselves, that this would make them more fertile and that it would increase the chances of them having a male child, which was much preferred in the Renaissance. And And I thought that was really interesting. And so that she conjectured that that was kind of going on here. And that was part of the sexual allure of it all. It's a highly speculative, um, you know, line of inquiry, but I thought it was very interesting. Goffin had all these wonderful feminist insights that she brought to the study of Renaissance art, which had been dominated by male art historians for 100 years. And anyway, she was great. I miss her. She had such wonderful manic sort of energy. She was really electric teacher. This, we're not sure who it's by. If it's by Giorgioni, I guess I have it's the pastoral symphony, or pastoral scene. And we're not sure if it's Titian or Giorgioni. It doesn't matter. It's a beautiful, it's another one of these little poesis, these kind of poetic things. And again, it's very inscrutable as to what exactly its message is, if any. In the very center of the composition are these two musicians, dressed, one in fancy city clothes of an upper class, bourgeois or nobleman, even a gentleman. And then he's discussing something with a much more rural looking man, with his hair and with his rougher jacket. And they seem to be musicians who are discussing music. And there's this wonderful intimacy between the two of them. And this is the kind of thing that does happen if you've ever done music with someone else, singing Schubert songs while someone, accompanies you on the piano, for example, or whatever musical things. If you work with another musician over and over, there begins to be this, like your one instrument that you can anticipate that the other person's going to speed up or slow down. And there gets to be this real intimacy, not in a psychological way, but in a musical way, in an artistic way. And I always, why I like to think this is Giorgioni for my own purposes. I don't really know. I'm not a connoisseur of this stuff, but because I can imagine this being Giorgioni, because they said he had such a lovely voice and that he played the lute. And that's what this instrument is. It's a lute, a beautiful pear-shaped precursor, I guess, to the guitar that was in use in the Renaissance. It has a very twangy sound. Sounds like more like a banjo than a guitar. It's one thing that I'm afraid that the pandemic may really change about Italian culture. It's one of the things I really love about Italian culture is this wonderful closeness, physical intimacy between men. There's a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of, at first it's disturbing because first when in Italy, men, they put their face right next to yours as you don't know them at all, just someone at the supermarket or whatever. They have a whole different kind of body thing. And I think that'll probably change with all the social distancing and so forth. And Italy has been such an epicenter of this horrible plague. And there was a horrible plague, of course, at the time too. In fact, Giorgioni died of the plague at the age of 32. He was very young. So here are these two wonderful friends at this intimate moment. It's incredible how they don't pay any attention to the naked women who are sitting right there in front of them. But that has also been explained as that they may be muses. They are probably invisible, that only the artist kind of conjures them up because, the muses of music and museum both have their root word in that Greek word about muse. And a muse is a spirit being, not exactly a god, but a spirit being from the classical pagan pre-Christian world that inspired artists. And so the museum was the first, kind of use that in music as well. So these may be the muses of music who are inspiring these young musicians in their making music together. It's interesting, the shepherd in the background. We have another one of these lovely bucolic landscapes. But I want to show you again this technique of just rubbing and rubbing and scumbling these breathed on incredible glazes and scumblings of this incredible figure who doesn't draw water from the well, but pours water into the well. It's an interesting take on it. But I wanted to point out not only the beautiful treatment of the flesh, which you don't really, which is really shaped by the light, not by muscles and bones the way Raphael or Michelangelo would have conceived of it, but rather kind of bathed in light. But I wanted you to notice also the treatment of the transparent pitcher of water. Notice how he uses these just a few very bold, pasty, thick brushstrokes of white applied right to the surface in a staccato sort of manner. And it almost reminds me of Impressionism with that broken kind of dappled light. And you see already here, hundreds of years before, Giorgioni is prefiguring this. And this has to do with this quality of painterliness, what we call painterliness. And that means that you can see the brushstrokes, that they're not, in a Leonardo, you can't see any brushstrokes. You cannot see it. You can't see it. But you can in Titian. Although Vasari tells us that Titian, especially as he got older, painted more and more with his thumbs and his fingers and rags as he did with, a paintbrush. But a few interesting impasto touches like that, just gleaming, glittering a water vessel. It's an incredibly poetic painting. It was probably started by Giorgioni and then finished by Titian. Now, Titian, in a way, the best thing that ever happened for Titian's career was the death of Giorgioni, like 1511. So, almost 10 years before even Raphael dies. So he does have a relationship. He becomes an international star, Titian, by his old age. It's not just Venice, but also, and here's the Duke of Ferrara, another Italian city, which he had patrons there. And earlier, the Duke of Ferrara wanted to have a room dedicated to Bacchus, the god of wine. And so he planned these bacchanals, and he gave the commission to Giovanni Bellini, but Bellini died in 1516. And so they asked for Titian to come back and finish them because he had worked with Bellini, and he does a good job. The figures are all by Bellini, and the background, the landscape, which is just a fantastic and beautiful and lush landscape, unprecedented really in Italian art. He gives it this wonderful setting while still being very, very respectful of his deceased maestro. And you can see they're all as revelers of the god of wine. They're all in various states of inebriation. However, he's able to do bacchanals all his own as well as part of this. He finishes the series that was started by Bellini, and he's given complete free rein to do whatever you want to with it, as long as they, have the theme of Bacchus, the god of wine, to ancient Rome. So he was Dionysos in Greece. And here's another, this bacchanal, where the devotees of the god of wine are drinking and enamored of it. The paterfamilias up here, naked, passed out on the hill, is the progenitor of the whole scene. They pour wine. This woman leans forward beautifully as she puts her cup behind, that very shallow cup, the way the Greeks had it. The man in the center, who looks adoringly almost at the jug of wine. He might be judging its quality by holding it up to the sun to see the dregs, to see how clear or cloudy it was. But it also seems to be almost like this is the communion of the gods. For Bacchus, this is their communion, is wine, is drunken revelry and letting go of your emotions. And especially I think in this painting, this incredible nude in the right foreground, who's just sort of passed out, I guess, in a drunken stupor, but she's just so beautiful. It's an incredibly sensuous and delicious sort of a revelry. He doesn't suggest at all any of the negative effects that alcohol might have on people. And some, bacchanals, especially by Baroque painters like Velázquez, really are critiques of the limits of alcohol and so forth. But here, it's pure pleasure, it's pure joy, it's pure revelry and unbridled emotions. I think my favorite of this series is this breathtaking painting of the arrival of Bacchus. It's Bacchus and Ariadne. Bacchus is there leaping out of his chariot. Ariadne on the left, she has been abandoned by Theseus, her lover. She slept and he took off, he's gone. And she looks out at sea, and just as she's looking out longingly, thinking, oh, I've been abandoned, suddenly appears to her Bacchus, who kind of comes out of the sky in a chariot driven by cheetahs. And you can see those beautifully rendered cheetahs in the foreground. I guess the original myth says that Bacchus has leopards, but the Duke of Ferrara actually had cheetahs, domesticated cheetahs. You can sort of domesticate cheetahs, I guess. And he had a pair of them there, so he worked directly from life. But Bacchus, I love Bacchus. He's so love struck by this mortal woman that he forgets Theseus, and he just leaps out of his chariot. And these satin cape flowing with the wind. There's this reckless abandon in it, and the colors. I tell you, this painting is radiant. The warmth of those colors, the incredible resonance of that rose-colored cape of Bacchus. And there, I don't know if you can see Bacchus's face here, but it's such a love-struck, a hopelessly love-struck individual, and it is reciprocated. And he marries her, and she becomes an immortal, or she's immortalized. The tragedy of a god and immortal is always that the god lives forever. But she became immortalized through these stars. You can see sort of up in the top part up here. She became a constellation, I guess. But I love the reckless way that he leaps out. He's going to fall flat in his face. The way he's leaping, he's not thinking, he's just leaping. And of course, he's a god, so he won't get hurt. But that's that clumsy impetuousness of hot infatuation, that nothing matters except this woman at this moment to him. And it just, and also his entourage. We have some of the entourage there. He has quite a group of groupies that follow him into, that come out of, I guess, the heavens, joyfully playing music with tambourines. They're Laocoon somehow, with the writhing snakes. And remember Laocoon, that Hellenistic statue that was unearthed in Rome under the archaeological digs that Raphael was in charge of as the curator of Rome. But I love these. Here's this drunken Silenus, the fat Silenus drunken on a donkey. But it's a wonderfully impetuous painting. And it also is one of the first attempts to really show motion in the way he leaps out of the chariot. It's not at all the way like an impressionist would show motion, right? It's frozen in this way, but it's the attempt to do that. Now, I think where he brings this this leap, or this levity, this feeling of being lifted up, is in this magnificent Assumption of the Virgin from 1516. And it's in a Gothic church in Venice. And here I brought in a picture of it on the high altar, so you can get an idea of its scale. And it can be read even from the back of this very large Gothic church. You can clearly read it because he's done these marvelous things with the tonality of light and dark and creating this incredible feeling of upward motion. If you look at the altar here, the flowers and the candlesticks, you can imagine a priest standing in front of the altar. So you can see these figures in the foreground are actually slightly larger than life size. And he gives us this incredible low perspective so that the horizon line is really low. And we're like a worm on the ground looking up, not only at Mary and God above, but also at the apostles themselves as they grasp at the air, not just unbelievably, as Mary is swept up into heaven in this glorious, she's assumed into heaven, riding on a cloud. She's beautiful. The colors here are not nearly as resonant as they really are in the painting. And they take us higher and higher to God. So you see below is a setting sort of sun, one of those kind of twilight scenes that he likes so much. But up above is this glorious, very, very warm light, like the sun, and she's just swept up in a moment. And it's incredible, because she also has gravitas. So you feel the weight of her being swept up. Now, he is looking at Raphael. Raphael did that, the theology, the Disputa, where there's a kind of a layer of clouds that are kind of circular. And so he's looking at all these other guys, and he wants to take the best aspects from Raphael, from Michelangelo, from Leonardo, from Bellini, from Giorgioni, and make them his own and spin them in a different sort of way. But the drama that this has, the way she's whisked away, is really a foretaste of the Baroque period of the 1600s, right? Long after his death, decades after his death, the work of Bernini and of Caravaggio and other artists like that would use the dramatic lighting and the lifting and the almost operatic kind of staging of these spectacles. And of course, the color, this warm, glowing, amber, rose-colored light that illuminates these marvelous canvases. Now, these are oil paintings. There aren't many. He does do frescoes, but not in Venice, because Venice is so damp that frescoes don't last. The plaster and the dampness of the lagoon, it just doesn't work. So what he did here, it's a very large oil painting. And that allows him too to take the time to do all the sort of elaborate glazes and so forth that he's so noted for. And not only is he looking at Raphael, Raphael is looking at Titian, because just a year or so after the premiere of the Assumption of that church in Venice, Raphael does his great last and unfinished painting of the Transfiguration. And there's a similar quality of light, but it's a cooler light and it's a clearer light with more disegno. But Titian, wow, that glow, that luminescence, that warm amber thing that he has going, it's just unites the whole thing in this rose kind of colored light. Later on, he becomes an international artist, working for the Emperor Charles V, the so-called Holy Roman Emperor, who rules from Nuremberg, but was also, through marriages and so forth, the King of Spain, Charles V, Karl de Grosser in Germany. But okay, so he rules a lot of things, and there was a great tension between the emperor in Nuremberg and Venice. But nonetheless, uh, uh, Titian had no problems, patriotic-wise, of working for the emperor. This is one of the things he did in Spain, of the Annunciation to Mary. And the color here is not as good as as it is in the original. There's more of a sense of that glow that he has. But I want to point out here the way the dove of the Holy Ghost kind of descends in this nimbus of light. This and this chiaroscuro of the light and dark, this would be other things that in the 1600s, the Baroque artists would take up. This sense of opulence, this sense of movement, this sense of dramatic light and dark that prefigures opera in its drama. So Titian, I think much more than even Raphael and Michelangelo, points us toward the Baroque culmination of all these things. He's the first glimmerings of these things. He was a great portraitist, and this is, we think, perhaps a self-portrait, but everybody that was anybody wanted to get their portrait done by Titian, especially as he got older. His fame increased. But I just wanted to show you here the incredible, you can't quite see it in the slides, but the incredible brushwork. It doesn't have that, it has, you can see the brushstrokes in this kind of satin as the light dances off the cool purplish kind of blue satin, and how it comes out at us, how he has the elbow and the billowing sleeve of the subject, whether it's him or another person, how it sort of overlaps that ledge, bringing it into our own space. And of course, he also turns, he's almost turned away from us, he turns toward us, almost as if we've just made a comment and he's turning and saying, well, I didn't agree with that, or whatever he's saying, he's responding and making this very clear eye contact with us. These very kind of psychologically deep portraits are one of the things that Titian is well known for, and he does a lot of them. But he does come in contact, as I said, with Charles V, and this is a big equestrian portrait that he does of Charles V, the defender of the faith, and of course, the enemy of the Protestants, which was seen as the sort of rising evil among Catholic monarchs during that century. And because of his connections not only with Spain, but with Nuremberg as the Kaiser, he also has to, he also is familiar with, with both the Inquisition in Spain and the lack of an Inquisition in Germany, which leads to the preponderance of Protestant states within the German Empire, or I guess you call it that, loose confederation of German states. So some were Catholic and some were not. And that's kind of the same way in Germany today. The southern part of Germany, Munich, Strasbourg, those are all Catholic countries. In the north, Berlin, Hamburg, these are Protestant countries. So he was seen as kind of a defender of the faith. I think one of the most marvelous paintings, and it's in the Prado, so it's in Spain, is this wonderful Adam and Eve that he does when he's about 60 or so, and just the way that beautiful parrot, which actually means knowledge. The way that we think of the owl as wise, they thought of the parrot as wise, because parrots, can talk, they can, imitate talk. And so they were thought to be, they symbolized wisdom. And of course, this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So knowledge is part of it. And it's interesting how soft Eve's body is and how firm Adam's body is. There's the contrast of the way he paints the flesh that's really lovely. And the serpent is this boy, is curled around. It is a boy, it's not a woman, it's not a man, the devil is a beguiling child. And he just hands that apple to Eve, and she's just ready to pluck it. Adam is reticent. He kind of says, oh no, see how he kind of says, oh no, we're not supposed to eat of that. But Eve is going for it. And already she seems to be covered with fig leaves, kind of incidentally here, but that's one of the things that happens is once they eat of the forbidden fruit, they realize they're naked. But at this point, they're still innocent. They don't realize they're naked. They're just natural. They're just part of the natural world. And look at how beautifully he paints that natural world, how kind of lush it is with the palm trees and everything, and this kind of lush background of Eden with with the forbidden fruit. I tell you, he just gets better and better and better. This now is in Boston, and this is the abduction of Europa, the rape of Europa, but rape means abduction in those days. And Jupiter, who is a very promiscuous god, was always falling in love with mortal women and things like that. So he came in the form of a bull. And as Europa was putting flowers on his horns, he suddenly swam away, kind of flew and swam away all at once. And you can see the friends of hers sitting on the shore. They're amazed because they didn't know that the bull was actually Jupiter, the king of the gods. And he whisks her away, and she's trying to maintain her balance. It's all happening so quickly. See, again, this is this idea of motion that Titian is concerned with, that anticipates the Baroque and other modern art as far as that goes. It's a beautiful painting. It's in Boston, the Gardner Museum. It's one of their real treasures that wasn't stolen, 20 years ago during that horrible heist that happened at the Gardner Museum. But notice, for example, the incredible oranges in the background. That's that Venetian red shining through. But here, he doesn't, as he gets older, he doesn't bother to sort of the niceties of the finish of the painting. And they end up being much brushier and much more painterly, with a sort of dragging of the brush, of the dry brush, over the surface. And it gives it this, especially with that scarf that sort of flows from her. She's so disoriented, just swept off her feet, literally, by this virile bull. And I love also the cherubs. This is Cupid, the god of love, and she's smitten, and so is Zeus, and it's a large painting. And it's very breathtaking. It's a very breathtaking painting. And again, he's looking at Raphael, those paintings in the Farnesina, the Palace Farnesina of Galatea. I should have brought it in, but he's kind of answering her but shaped by light and color, not by Disegno so much. This is a self-portrait when he's very old. He does get better and better. You can see here that Rembrandt, 100 years later, would be looking very closely at these Titians, especially the late Titian. The way he uses heavy kind of pasty paint in his underpainting and then glazes over and wipes away. And so it becomes this incredible thing. And it's kind of interesting to see, his treatment of himself, because, he gets older and older and older and better and better and better and more and more and more famous. This is a very strange portrait, a self-portrait of like 3 eras of his life: as a young man, as a mature man, I guess in his late 40s, and then as an elderly man in his 80s. And he shows us these 3 faces as well. It almost reminds me of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that is at the gates of Hades. But the center one is not a dog, but is a feline. It has this lion kind of a thing. And it's interesting because the lion is also the symbol of Venice and of St. Mark. St. Mark's relics, the relics of St. Mark, are there in the San Marco, in the great Byzantine cathedral that is in the center of Venice. But it's interesting in this kind of psychological depth. The older he gets, the more wise he becomes, the more insights he has into human psychology. And so he just becomes more and more mature. His late painting, it's breathtaking. This is another deposition, now, geez, 50 years after the one we saw at the beginning. Now in this very painterly mode. Look at that red again. And he puts himself, just like Michelangelo did in his late Pietà, as Joseph of Arimathea. And so this is a recognizable self-portrait there, dressed as a merchant. And look at the blue. Look at the blue. It sings. I don't know the way to say it. It sings. You can see it in the reproduction. In the actual thing, it sings. It's incredible. And, it's not just a tour de force of color and so forth. It's a deeply moving meditation on human frailty and death. And he becomes more and more, as he gets older and older, they let him do whatever he wants to. They should buy it. So he becomes obsessed with the death of Jesus and the passion of Jesus and so forth. And he does a lot of these kind of things, which also Michelangelo does at the end of his life, doing several Pietas. This is a very, very moving one. They put him into a sarcophagus. It looks almost like a Roman sarcophagus. But look at the level of painterliness. Look at how brushy this is, And I guess younger painters waiting for him to die because he just gets better and better. And he lives forever. He outlives, younger artists that are coming up. But this, again, it looks, like a Rembrandt. It has that incredible kind of dry, pasty underpainting, glazed over, but with that remarkable color that you wouldn't find in Rembrandt. But all the psychological depth. Then he becomes obsessed with death as he gets older. His very last painting that was finished by one of his pupils was this Pietà. And he shows himself as Saint Jerome, who had translated the Bible from Greek and Hebrew into Latin. And so this is, and Mary Magdalene, it's a very interesting painting. Mary Magdalene here kind of raises her hand as if she's, I don't know, hailing a taxi or something. She's trying to draw our attention. She moves out of the picture. Look at how painterly it is. Look at how the brushstrokes show in this painting. This very rusticated kind of niche in the background. Do I have a close-up? Yeah. Look at the application of paint. It's absolutely incredible. It's like he takes this dry, pasty paint and sort of drags it across the surface, giving it this rough, but yet look at the light. Look at the nimbus coming from behind the face of Christ or from behind the face of his mother. And this was a votive painting. It was made with the intention of God sparing him from the plague. He's very elderly now. He's probably in his 90s. Also, his son, Orazio, and it was a votive painting. And Orazio was no kid either. He was, in his 60s or so by this time. And actually, they both did die of the plague before he finished the votive painting. That is kind of a testament to his whole career and his whole use of colore as a way of defining, of light, of color, defining form, not drawing, not composition, not disegno, but colore, color, as the epitome of the sort of incredible luminosity that he continues right to the very, very end in his work with his deep meditations on mortality. Well, that's Titian for you. I'd like to perhaps open it up now to